Hello, my name is Savannah Hagen, and this is my final presentation on why Pier 1 went bankrupt. First up, for the introduction, we're going to be going over the points I'll be discussing during this presentation, which include problem identification, research process, surveying and questioning, data analysis, and then we're going to have a discussion along with a conclusion and my recommendations made for Pier 1. First up, for the problem identification, I want to talk about the two key problems that I found during my research on Pier 1 and why they went bankrupt, which include a lack of an online presence, meaning they didn't have a website or anything really developed for people to do online shopping, which seems to be the new thing that people want to do, and also their products were too expensive. Next up, I want to talk about my hypothesis. My alternative hypothesis says there's a statistical relationship between Pier 1's pricing and bankruptcy, and there's a statistical relationship between Pier 1's lack of online presence and bankruptcy. For my null hypothesis, which is the complete opposite, and we will be testing against this, states there is not a statistical relationship between Pier 1's pricing and bankruptcy, and there is not a statistical relationship between Pier 1's lack of online presence and bankruptcy. For my research method, I will be implementing a quantitative research in order to test my hypothesis. This is the best method to use because it's expressed through numbers and measurements, which will make it easy to either confirm or deny my hypothesis. I will be conducting this from a large random sample of people to determine the customer's point of view. The survey will consist of a bunch of different multiple choice questions for people to answer and help us gauge whether or not to confirm my hypothesis. I'll be conducting the survey through SurveyMonkey, which is an online approach to be able to get access to people's opinions. This is the most efficient way for me to conduct this research since it's online. It is time efficient and much faster way to collect and analyze the data needed for the surveys. For my research design, I'll be conducting exploratory research because I want to further explore and examine my research topics. This method allows me to explore objectives, problems, and gather reasoning on why Pier 1 went bankrupt. This is going to help us determine the why of the problems. For defining my population, I am defining as consumers who are interested in home decor and essentials in the home industry at a global scale. Pricing, online shopping, quality, and style all factor into why consumers prefer certain companies in a large competitive industry. For the sampling size for this research will consist of domestic and international markets, since the main areas of Pier 1 are in the United States, but they also have locations in Canada and Germany because they are a global market. The survey will be conducted online but also shared via social media to ensure the reach of people from the targeted countries that we are trying to attain information from. There have been many different scales of measurements for the survey development. I implemented a Likert scale to measure attitudes, dichotomy questions, open-ended questions, and fixed alternative questions. These scales of questions will help me get opinions, direct answers, attitudes towards the company, and really pinpoint the weakness Pier 1 has according to consumers. For my data analysis, I use SurveyMonkey for my survey, and they actually analyze the data within the app for me, and I just use bar graphs to be able to present the data. Up next is my questions for the survey. My first question is, how old are you? These two questions help identify the market of respondents to compare the target market of Pier 1 shoppers. And for my first question, I got 40 responses for all of the questions, but many people were between the age range of 22 and 58. For the second question, where are you from? I had a lot of people answer from Florida because that's where I'm located, but I had many others from out of state, including California, North Carolina, New Jersey, Illinois, etc. For my second question, or my third question, sorry, was do you like home decor shopping? I had a lot of people answer yes, and very few people answer no, so this is a very good indication on the market that we are going to be analyzing for the respondents. And this should give us good results based off the amount of people that do enjoy home decor shopping. For the fourth question, it was, have you ever shopped at Pier 1? Out of the 40 respondents, 80% of people have shopped at Pier 1, 17.5% of people haven't heard of Pier 1, but have heard of Pier 1 but haven't shopped there. For my fifth question was, how often do you shop at Pier 1 if you have shopped there before? Out of 40 respondents, only 10% of people have shopped there often, 75% of people sometimes shop there, and 50% of people never shop there. For my sixth question, out of 40 respondents, 42 people liked Pier 1's products, 45% of people liked some products, and 12.5% of people did not really like Pier 1's products, which is another point that wasn't in my hypothesis, but I noticed during my research was that Pier 1 lacked finding a sweet spot. Although they had beautiful and unique products, they just were never really consistent with the products they would have in their storefront. For my seventh question, out of 40 respondents, 42.5% of people thought Pier 1 was overpriced, which is matching up with my hypothesis on why people didn't want to shop there leading up to their bankruptcy. 42.5% of people thought their products were sometimes overpriced, and only 15% of people didn't think their products were overpriced. For my eighth question, out of 40 respondents, 40% of people would be more likely to shop at Pier 1 if they had an online presence. 47.5% of people would maybe be more likely to shop there if there's an online presence. And 12.5% of people wouldn't be more likely to shop there if there was an online presence. Now to my final two questions. Would you prefer Pier 1, Target, or Amazon for shopping for home decor? Out of the 40 respondents, 27% of people would prefer to shop at Pier 1. 27.5% of people would prefer to shop at Target. 45% of people would rather shop at Amazon for home decor. Pier 1 is in a tough spot with their competitors because their competitors have the qualities that they lack, and that's probably why people would rather shop there. For my final question, I did an open-ended, and out of 40% of respondents, only 25% of people would recommend shopping at Pier 1 because 75% of people commented that they liked their products but wouldn't recommend because it was too expensive. Some of the comments include, they have some cool stuff but way too expensive. I wouldn't recommend overpriced goods. You can find something cheaper elsewhere. Nice items but too expensive. I wouldn't recommend, it's overpriced. Now we're going to talk about how we can get there. If I was Pier 1, what I would tell them, what I would recommend, and my conclusion after all my research. So for my discussion, I would tell them Pier 1 missed the mark with the lack of an online presence and their overpriced items. Consumers would prefer competitors because they have these key qualities that Pier 1 lacks. For my conclusion, numbers are correlated directly with my hypothesis, which tested correct. 87% would be more likely to shop if there were an online presence, and 85% would shop if their items were priced cheaper. So my recommendations for Pier 1 include finding a sweet spot with products, lowering prices, and creating a website for online shopping, and maybe even a mobile media presence. Although many liked Pier 1 for their uniqueness, their lack of an online presence for shoppers as well as expensive items led Pier 1 to bankruptcy. They should have noticed this quicker by analyzing competitors and making adjustments, but since they didn't, it led them to being bankrupt. If they were to have a second chance, I would recommend they fix those two main factors stated in my hypothesis, and I bet they would have a much higher success rate. Thank you for listening to my presentation on Pier 1 and why they went bankrupt.